Good morning, everybody. I'm Brett Janelle, and I'm here with my partner and wife, Annette Janelle. And for many of you, you know us as the hosts of the Retired Living Truth series. And joining us today is Richard Schulze from the Schulze Law Group. And today's topic is on healthcare and the impact that COVID-19 is having on healthcare from a legal perspective. So, good morning, Rich. How are you today?
Good morning. Great. Thank you very much for having me today.
Oh, our pleasure, Rich. So just to get things started, I'd just like to ask you, Rich, just in your practice, what kind of questions are you getting from clients and prospective clients at the moment as it relates to COVID-19, if you are getting any questions?
Yeah, getting quite a few actually, and they seem to start with, is there anything I need to do? Is this different than what's coming or what's happened in the past? And then that, related to that, or the same question said a different way, is, do my documents need to be updated? Does my plan need to be updated because of what's happening right now? And my general answer is yes. I mean, if you've been following the news, this illness is unlike anything we've ever seen in the world, at least in the US before. Maybe the 1918 flu was similar, although not really, because that one resulted in almost immediate death or within a week. And this one seems to have people sick anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. So it's a much different scenario, and there's a lot of questions coming up about healthcare decisions, about disability decision making that we've been discussing.
Great. Well, let's talk about healthcare directives. First, for those not familiar, what is a healthcare directive? And is this the same as a healthcare power of attorney?
And actually, Rich, can I just jump in before you answer that? If people have questions as we go along and you would like to type them into the question and answer box, you're welcome to do so. And then we'll keep an eye on that, and then we can ask Rich as we go along those questions. So not in the chat, but if you touch your screen somewhere, a little pop-up will come up and it'll say Q&A where you can type in your questions. So sorry, Rich, did you want to repeat the question?
Sure. Healthcare directives. I just wanted to know, well, first of all, what is a healthcare directive? And then is it the same as a healthcare power of attorney?
Yeah, that's a very good question. They are, in some sense, they're the same because they both carry instructions for what you want with your healthcare when you cannot make healthcare decisions for yourself. The difference is a healthcare power of attorney designates someone to make decisions for you when you can't. And you can leave directions, you can leave guidelines there. Healthcare directive is literally your instructions to the doctor regarding your healthcare. One version of that I know everybody at the workshop spoke about, I think it was about a year ago, is what's called a POLST, or physician's order on life-sustaining treatment. That's sort of a statutory one. And one of the things that has been happening here with this illness, particularly, is that the traditional decision-making isn't or may not be appropriate. For the most part, if I were talking to one of my clients or talking to someone here about their end-of-life decisions and who they'd want to be making those, it would relate to, I'm going to call it a traditional illness where my body's failing. With this illness, it's usually not my body failing all at once, it's slowly failing. And so there's some different decisions that you may want to make as you go through this. I think one of the reasons why this becomes so important is that, with a traditional illness, and if I've talked to some, I know many of the people on the webinar I've spoken to, most illnesses look something like, I'm at home, I get sick, I go into the hospital, they do some treatment, and either I get out or I don't get out. And if I do get out, if it's a terminal illness, I'm on hospice, and then over the next few weeks, typically I'll die peacefully. This illness doesn't function that way. It seems to be someone's mildly sick, they go in, they have a fever, a dry cough, whatever the symptoms are. And then the next thing they know, maybe they're on a ventilator. But in traditional illness, the ventilator is sort of a last resort. With this illness, it's a treatment. The problem is you end up on that treatment for 3 weeks or months. And at that point, there's tremendous damage to the body, as you might imagine, having something shoved in your body that way. But it's turning out that it's not all that effective, that many times people are kept on life support that way, or life, I don't know, want to call it life support, kept on life treatment, I guess, is a way to refer to it at this point, on the treatment, only to come off of the treatment and be in, if they make it off, in worse condition than they are when they went in. You know, if some of you have had surgeries, you might remember, you know, you go under for a few hours for hip surgery or some other surgery, and you end up, you know, your loved one, they're goofy for a while, right? They have some memory issues. They can't think so clearly. I know I had a family member have breast cancer surgery, and they were under for a few hours. And it took her, I want to say 3 to 4 months to recover, and she was otherwise young and healthy. With this disease, there's seniors that are going under for 3-4 weeks, and they come out with permanent brain damage. So that's definitely something that you want to, when you talk about directives, et cetera, you want to think about. Sorry.
Very good. So let me just ask, Rich, assuming I have a healthcare power of attorney, and everyone should, I'm sure you'd agree, is there anything I need to be aware of or to potentially change as it relates to the situation we find ourselves in?
Yeah, some of it I just hit on. I think the biggest thing, you know, most of us would choose, and I'm vastly overgeneralizing. You know, most of my clients choose, you know, if a machine's the only thing keeping me alive, I don't want the machine. And that, again, as I said, in a traditional illness where my body's shutting down, maybe that's right. But then you've got this illness where being kept on life support because your lungs have filled up or lungs aren't able to do oxygen exchange, needing a breathing tube, may be part of the treatment that's medically recommended. So it's not sort of a, you know, again, the traditional decision. I think one of the things that I want people to think about, and this is, you know, a legal discussion, but it's a medical one, is preserving your right to choose and your right to say the type of care that you're going to receive and the type of care you want or don't want. And the difference is that maybe it's a lot harder to make a decision when, you know, there's mom or dad suffering from COVID-19, and the doctors just say, well, the next treatment is to put them on a pressurized oxygen mask. Well, it looks like they're making some progress. Let's put them on a breathing machine. Oh, but to do that, we've got to put you in a coma. And the entire time you're in that coma, you know, there's certain things that happen to your body and your brain, right? Your brain's part of your body when you're in that coma. And so you may want to look at, you know, answering healthcare options that relate directly to this illness. You know, for example, if I have I'll call it a traditional illness, I don't want to be on life support, but if it's a COVID-19 infection, then what I would prefer to have is maybe life support not to exceed a week or 2 weeks, and see what's happening to my body or my brain. Again, one of the considerations that you're definitely going to want, I was reading some of the medical reports this morning, are the people coming off of the breathing machines with permanent brain damage, apoxia, where even with the breathing machine, not enough oxygen getting to the brain. So there's brain damage, or being under, you know, being in a coma. You know, medically induced coma means they basically are drugging you with very powerful narcotics for a period of time. And that will affect your cognitive and physical functioning. And you really want to ask yourself, you know, am I willing to receive that level of treatment? And if so, for how long? What are the outcomes that I'm willing to face? So there's those questions. You know, the other one that I want to hit is there's a lot of people, including me when this started, that said, oh, this is going to be a lot like a flu infection, right? I had the swine flu, completely miserable, never want to do that again. Fully reject life support. No, I don't want to say that, but it was easily the sickest and most painful disease I've ever had, infection. You know, the difference is that with most flus, they know how to treat it. They know how to get you over it. It's a very expected disease. This one is not the flu. It's not the way it's affecting the body. It's shutting down organs. It's shutting down, as I said, cognitive functioning. It's shutting down the body's ability. With the flu, you have trouble breathing, but your body can exchange oxygen. With this, your body's not getting oxygen in. And so, what that means, my mom, I think I've told many people, my mom had dementia at the end of her life. It was caused by COPD. It was caused by when she would lay down, she could not get enough oxygen into her body and her brain atrophied. This disease seems to replicate that effect. And so you got to, you want to start looking at those questions.
So basically COVID-19 is forcing people to think about these really hard decisions to make as far as end of life. Because when they meet with you, typically it's to talk about this, but it seems like it's further down the line. But this is bringing it right to the forefront. We need to think about this now.
Yeah, actually, that's a really, really excellent way to put it. Is it, most of us, when we talk about it, it's like a someday maybe. Depending on, the way this thing works, it is very likely that all of us will be exposed to it at some point. And the nature of the infection and how sick we get, that's an open question. But it really is something to look at right now, because if you get this disease, this is what you will go through.
So would you suggest, Rich, if we had a healthcare power of attorney in place to go back and review it in light of what you've said, and does it reflect what our wishes would be?
Absolutely. And even if you have one, you may want to leave supplemental instructions, or, we've been advising clients about this for a while now, regarding what you want if you get this disease. And again, if you think about it, most of us, when our bodies start shutting down, we've been sick for a while. We've had kidney disease or COPD or something. And it's I don't want to say it's predictable, but it's, I don't know, I'm going to call it normal. This disease, you go through life one day, you're feeling kind of crappy, you go in, may or may not have a fever, but you've got this cough, they stick a swab down your throat, and they say you're not going home today. And then 3 days later, you're on death's door. When the question becomes, do you want medical treatment to try to fight through this disease? When given your condition and your wishes, that may not be what you want.
Right. So if I wasn't happy, if I looked at mine and I assume it's going to say they're going to put me on a ventilator, maybe that's good for a week or two, but like 5 weeks later, I probably wouldn't want to be on a ventilator any longer.
Yeah, that's a really
What
good.
can I do to change what I have in place to kind of reflect that? Because that I'm pretty sure isn't covered by the power of attorney that I have now for healthcare. Yeah,
virtually no one's power of attorney addresses that. And it is, obviously this is a little bit self-serving. You can come in and meet with me and we can advise you through that. In the ordinary course, I would suggest going in and talking to your doctor maybe about that. That's, hard to do right now. But it really is time to think about those questions. We again, jumping ahead, last year we offered the free consults for people who had questions when I did the last workshop like this. This is, similarly, we would offer that to people here as well via Zoom, just socially appropriate distancing.
Perfect. And we'll definitely address that later in the call. Now, I just want to switch gears a little bit as far as what about the financial power of attorney? What should we be thinking about there?
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Again, and if we go to the normal illness, when the healthcare power of attorney kicks in, for the most part, it's relatively short-lived. And, other than maybe a few days in the hospital, people aren't cognitively impaired for a long period of time. Again, in this disease, they are cognitively impaired and they're unconscious for anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks. And then, and it's not a light switch recovery. It's not like, 8 weeks, I get discharged, I'm ready to go run down the street. When I went through my swine flu, I was sick for about 3 weeks. It took me another month before I could go to work full time. This disease, when you look at the recovered people who've had it and are recovering, if they're young, under 30, they seem to recover in a couple of weeks after they're released. Anybody over that, it's months. And so a financial or general power of attorney is giving someone the authority to deal with your financial affairs when you can't. Now, most of the time when I'm talking to people about that, we're dealing with something, like Alzheimer's or some dementia that's this ongoing cognitive impairment. But again, it's something you see coming and you prepare for the most part. This one, somebody can go in for, a cough, test positive. 2 days later, they're on a breathing machine for 8 weeks. Your life doesn't go on hold for those 8 weeks. You do, but your life continues. And, one of the things that we want to address with the financial powers of attorney is, converting them from what's called springing, only effective when a doctor determines I'm disabled, to effective immediately if, upon my inability to make decisions. Because, if you think about it, if you don't pay your power bill, mortgage, rent, whatever those bills are that you've got in your life, or you can't access your IRA to withdraw money to pay for those additional funds, you may lose your house, you may get kicked out, you're going to have a huge financial problem when you recover. And so the financial power of attorney is at least as important as healthcare power of attorney for the nature of this illness, to have someone lined up to deal with the financial affairs.
And Rich, do we need to be concerned, like Annette and I'm guessing if I end up in the hospital on a ventilator because I've caught it, then Annette's probably going to get it at some point in time as well, shortly thereafter, and may also end up on a ventilator. So neither of us can make financial decisions. So what happens then? Do we need to be thinking about that? Because in a normal situation, you only expect one of you to have something happen, not both.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one that no one thinks about, because you're right. Typically, someone becomes incapacitated or ill, their spouse is around to make decisions for them. And as if you've been through that experience, as I know many on this call have been, there's a little bit of pressure, but if you're a spouse, you can pretty much continue. But you're right, with this illness, if one of you gets sick, the other one will get sick. There is no immunity, no inherent immunity to this disease. So you very well may have, one spouse precede the other one, but the other spouse will be there. And so you really, in terms of the financial power of attorney, the healthcare decision-making, you do want to have secondary agents. You want to look and make sure those are still the right people. Because again, this has moved things sort of from a someday maybe conversation, and it still is to an extent, but in reality, we are all going to get this unless there's a vaccine, or we permanently isolate. And if I get it, my spouse is going to get it. If you get it, Annette's going to get it. Now, how sick they get, et cetera, that may be open. But because of that, you do need to look at the powers of attorney and have the right people in place, because the default rules, the sort of, the mushiness society awards to spouses may not be available. It may be your kids or your neighbors that need to be making decisions for you.
Okay, thanks, Rich. And let me just jump over. One of our attendees on the call has asked whether or not hospitals have a form to complete when you enter. If you're diagnosed with COVID-19, usually you're going to get worse from when you're admitted to the hospital. Do they have forms? Are they kind of covering this, or is that like beyond the scope of what they're able to do?
It's a little bit beyond the scope of what they do generally. They for the most part, they will. So actually, a couple of points. One is they do have powers of attorney, the statutory forms available. They do have Pulse available for completion there. What they're not particularly good at is consulting with you on that and saying, oh, here's the implications that you need to think about. They're going to say, oh, if we need to put you on a breathing machine, do you want to be on a breathing machine? Okay, check. Without mentioning that you may be on it for 8 weeks and suffer brain damage. But the other side to look at for yourself is that if you get admitted and you're facing this illness, which is frankly terrifying, right? I'm reasonably young, I'm healthy. And when I think about it, it startles me. You really want to be making these decisions when you're being admitted with a disease that may put you on the back for 6 or 8 weeks. Or do you want a chance when you can actually think about it? and make sure, and equally as importantly, talk to the people in your life about what you want to have happen, which I know is one of the harder conversations any of us will ever have. But it's vital in this scenario.
Yeah, great point. And just for full disclosure, Rich is our attorney, and I know when we went through our healthcare power of attorneys, there's lots of questions. It took hours for us to have conversations around. It's not something you probably want to do in a crisis mode.
Yeah, it would just, I always tell people, the surest way to make a mistake is let something become an emergency. And you may make it through it, but once you're in a crisis, nothing goes well. I mean, look at what's happening now. It just, and this is, of course, pretty much, it was predictable if you've studied epidemiology, but the reality of it was unimaginable. And we're in a crisis and all this going on. If we could have imagined something like this 10, 15, 20 years ago and put in place safe harbor, we'd be probably in better shape. And the same with you and your healthcare decisions. If you have time to think about it, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to make a more rational process.
So just for our attendees who are on, someone had typed in a question into chat, which was great, and we just asked that one. But again, if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to click on that Q&A box. So if you're on a mobile device, a phone, or a tablet, you should be able to just click somewhere on the screen and it'll pop up and you'll see Q&A, and then you can type in a question. And if you're on the phone and have something you really want to ask, you can press *9, and we will open it up to Q&A in another 5 or 10 minutes. But if you have things that are pressing as we're kind of talking about them, feel free to ask the question.
Yeah, and
what else did we want to cover in it?
Guardianship.
Oh, guardianship. Yeah, most definitely. So how does guardianship fit into this, Rich? Is what we've talked about a way to avoid guardianship, or is there more we need to know? And can you just tell us what guardianship is and how it might relate to all of this?
Yeah, that's, again, you sort of hop over the obvious one. I always do that. A guardianship happens when you become legally unable to make decisions for yourself and decisions need to be made. So guardianship is a court proceeding. It is, you've heard, I think some of you may have heard me phrase it this way, right? It's a lawsuit you start against yourself, paid for with your own money, that ends when you die. And if you've ever been in a lawsuit, the defining characteristic is that you lose control. You start responding to something that you have no control over. And where that becomes, so in general, and then I'll talk about where it's relevant here. In general, where a guardianship occurs is if someone doesn't have the appropriate documents or planning in place, and they become unable to make decisions for themselves, either physically or cognitively. And again, there's two kinds of guardianships. There's a guardianship of the person, a guardianship of the estate, but what they both have in common is the court assuming control and jurisdiction over your life. And what we've really talked about is the way you avoid a guardianship is through powers of attorney. The trusts offer the opportunity to avoid a guardianship, but without effective powers of attorney, you will end up having a guardianship. And coming back to the example I used before, where someone goes in, and let's say they go into the emergency room or their doctor's office, they test positive, and they start undergoing treatment for a few weeks. Even if they do manage to fill out a healthcare power of attorney and nominate someone to make healthcare decisions for them, without a financial power of attorney, you may need to go get a guardianship established to deal with the financial affairs. And again, in an ordinary illness, an ordinary scenario, the illness is relatively short term. It lasts, a couple of weeks, and during most of those time, you're reasonably competent, able to sign checks, for example. This illness, you may be essentially unconscious and incompetent for, a month to 3 months. And even after 3 months, if you start reading some of the case studies, people aren't all the way back yet. And then we end up getting a guardianship of the estate in place just to pay your bills, just to access your health insurance to make sure this is covered or not covered. Find out which doctors we can talk to. So it is, this is a guardianship is something to be avoided. And this scenario sort of creates a unique opportunity why we may get them imposed on us anyway.
And then how do you get off of guardianship if you've been put on it?
Well, you remember it's a lawsuit you file against yourself. So the only way to get a lawsuit out is to win it. And the way you win a guardianship is to get medical records that prove that you're competent again. And the guardianship isn't needed. And again, if you're in a scenario where some of these case studies are showing up, where people are, 8-10 weeks out, they're on oxygen, they're having trouble remembering names, they're having trouble remembering, where their accounts are, things like that. The court's unlikely to release the guardianship. They're going to keep it going. So it's not, courts tend to be, that's both good and bad, right? The courts tend to want to be very protective of disabled people. That makes sense. Because they're, potentially open to exploitation, right? If there's bad people in the way. And in Nevada, we have a history of senior exploitation, elder exploitation that is, depending on your perspective, either the best or the worst in the country. Worst for most of us, unless you're a scammer, then it's the best. So what it takes is medical evidence, hiring an attorney, going to court, and convincing the judge that the guardianship isn't needed. And it's a fairly long, drawn-out process. It's not fun. So
in a nutshell, plan ahead.
Avoid it.
Avoid it at all costs.
Unless you want to contribute to my retirement, I'm fine with that. No, but I mean, I don't like guardianships. I mean, we right now in our office, I think have three active guardianships where we're seeking a guardian. And, from a lawyer perspective, they're relatively painless. I mean, there's a lot of details and so forth. From the family perspective, it's miserable. From the protected person's, the incapacitated person's point of view, imagine having to go to court and the judge look you in the eye and say, excuse me, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, I have evidence here saying you're insane and can't take care of yourself. Is that right? You wouldn't want to go through that, So yes, plan ahead, avoid a guardianship.
So I know last year, Rich, when we did our seminar on wills, trusts and guardianship, we spent a lot of time talking about this, but in short, the way to avoid guardianship would be to have the healthcare power of attorney and the financial power of attorney in place at a minimum. Yeah,
exactly. Those are the key documents. I've been doing this 25 years. And when I started, I was like, a trust avoids guardianship. Turns out that's not right. I mean, it may, but it usually doesn't. It's the powers of attorney that are key. An effective healthcare power of attorney, an effective power of attorney. And the thing that I would say about the general power of attorney or financial power of attorney, that it needs to be geared to what you own and what you care about. There are, a lot of us have IRAs or 401ks. One of the big things, particularly if we have the opportunity to do this, is if we do a power of attorney, we give it to the custodian and say, well, you accept this. Do you need language added so you'll approve it so that, God forbid, I become incapacitated, my agent can come and withdraw funds to pay for my care. And one of the things I've found is that a lot of times that the form powers of attorney or, getting a power of attorney from one of the document preparation companies just doesn't have the language that you need, doesn't have the authority. And so now you've got a power of attorney that doesn't work, and now we're in guardianship again. So that would be the only caveat I would say is you want both of those. You want a power of attorney and you want an effective power of attorney.
And can I have those without having to perhaps put a trust in place or a will? Can they stand alone without those other legal instruments?
They can indeed. Yes, they are.
So I could come and see you if I was concerned about a healthcare directive healthcare power of attorney, have that and a financial one put in place, and maybe later worry about a trust or a will or.
Yeah. Yes, I think, right now, if I were telling people in this current scenario, I'm never one to tell you not to estate plan, not to do your actual planning and who gets what. the powers of attorney are going to be vital as this crisis unfolds. It's not they are standalone documents. They are the documents that make sure that the people you want making decisions for you are the right people. A trust can deal with assets relatively well, depending on the nature of the asset. It may work well for a house. It is not going to do anything for an IRA or an investment that's outside of the trust. But they are standalone documents. So I think that answers.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to switch gears a little bit.
Okay, switch gears.
Okay.
Go, yeah.
I just wanted to know, how is COVID-19 affecting the way you do your business as far as people coming in to see you?
Well,
Yeah,
it's
great question.
Yeah, it's a little bit like it's affecting all of us. I'm doing a lot of this kind of meeting using Zoom or FaceTime. Those are the two that I tend to prefer. They're relatively easy to use. I know there's other options out there, but we've been doing a ton of virtual meetings like this. Some of the documents we can even execute remotely like this. It turns out in Nevada, we can do healthcare documents remotely. We can probably do wills remotely. A little bit of an open question, but I feel confident personally that we can do it. The ones that need to be notarized are the powers of attorney or deeds, or financial powers of attorney, healthcare powers of attorney. And the way we've been doing that, we've got a couple of different options. We've done drive-up document signings where somebody just stays in the car. We sort of pass it through the window. Everybody has gloves on and masks. That's worked. We also have a clean room in the office that we keep sanitized, socially appropriate distancing. And we can do that as well. A lot of the initial meetings I'm now doing through Zoom, a lot of the questions. So if someone had a question about their healthcare powers of attorney, for example, and for a lot of my clients now, we're just doing it this way and then doing updates on the drive-by basis.
Wonderful. We'll open it up to questions in a moment from our attendees, Rich, but is there anything we didn't ask you that you think is really important that you wanted to quickly touch on?
There's a couple of them. The first one is you want to make sure that your agents are the right people. So if you have in your healthcare power of attorney, financial power of attorney, you want the right human beings making decisions for you. And so if you do have those in place, look at them again. I mean, the number of times where I've sat with people, over the phone, or we've done Zoom calls, and they look at it, they go, "Oh no, that isn't right anymore." It's a little bit. That's probably the first question I would ask. And then another one that I think I get quite a bit is, the scope of a power of attorney. A power of attorney is a living document, which means it lives while you live. And when you stop breathing, it stops. So it's not a document that supplants a will or supplants any testamentary document, so a trust or something like that. It's a document that assists in managing your life and affairs when you're alive, but it ends when you die. And so that's why, we talked a little bit about deferring a will or a trust, and given the option between doing all of it or just a powers of attorney, absolutely do the powers of attorney right now. But recognize that when you do that, those powers of attorney cease when you cease.
Good point.
And those are, I think I mentioned the other one that I've had to deal with, is the powers of attorney not addressing the issue that's being presented. And so I mentioned, if you have a large IRA or even any IRA, you want to make sure that your power of attorney allows the access and investment of the IRA assets, for example. You want to make sure that in your powers of attorney, there's healthcare releases. What all of us are somewhat familiar with HIPAA, the Medical Privacy Act. You want to have those releases in the powers of attorney so your agent can talk to doctors and get medical records. I think the other one, and this just gets kind of back to what I've been harping on with the COVID-19 and the healthcare decisions. my goal when I did a healthcare power of attorney, I always use my mom as an example. We sat down and did a very detailed, much like the one, Brett and Annette, we did with you. And when my mom got sick, because she did get there, and I had to make decisions for her, and the doctor asked me a question, I could point and say, oh, she wants this to happen. I have a lot of guilt about missing my mom's dementia as it was coming along. If it were your mom, I would have seen it immediately. My mom, I didn't see it at all. But that part of it, I have no guilt about. I know I did what she wanted to be done. That's the importance of doing healthcare powers of attorney, right? You want more than what the state requires, because it gives some guidance, but it's pretty bare. You want to take, to the extent you can in your directives, in your healthcare power of attorney, address the questions that the doctors will be asking, so that the people making those decisions are A, they know what you want and they're doing what you want, and B, you're not leaving them with a huge amount of anxiety or guilt about what happened or didn't happen. So
Great. Thank you, Rich.
And Brett's just trying to work out screens here at the moment. My apologies, trying to being outsmarted by technology. So what I'd just like to do is talk about our upcoming events, and if I can work out how to share this. There we go. So can you see the slide I have up on the screen, Rich?
I can.
Good, that means everyone else can too. Fantastic. So one of the things that everyone appreciated we did last year after we did that wills, trusts and guardianship seminar was we had you do a free legal counsel day where people could come in for a complimentary consultation. And obviously at the moment we can't come in, but we could do a Zoom call with you. So I arranged with Rich to do something similar again, and that's to do some complimentary 40-minute consultations. Is that correct, Rich?
That's correct.
Yeah, so for anyone who needs help working out whether they need to have these documents in place or whether they should have a will or a trust, or just general questions you have related to these documents, so not about anything else in the legal realm, but specific to this, not about your neighbor suing you or anything crazy like that. But the way we're going to do this, I'm going to launch a poll in just a moment. In fact, I will do that right now so people can just simply answer if you would like a complimentary consultation with Rich. So let me just bring that up.
So if you're on the phone listening in, you are not able to participate in the poll, but if this does interest you, you can call us or email us and let us know.
So you should have on your screen a simple series of questions. And the first one is, would you like a 40-minute complimentary consultation on power of attorney, either one that we spoke about, will or trust, with Rich? And if you would, just simply click on the yes, and then we'll have Rich's staff, his team, reach out to you and set up a consultation as appropriate over the next week or two. And if you don't, that's fine also, but just for those who can take advantage of it, again, it's totally complimentary. And then we just wanted to touch on a couple of the upcoming events that we have. So on April the 30th, we have our seminar, The Truth About Staying Independent. So that's Thursday at 10 a.m., April 30. And then
This is the one that we had in March that was canceled because of COVID-19.
Yeah, basically the day the shelter in place order came down was when we're about to have the seminar. And then on May 7th, the University of Nevada, Reno, Sanford Center for Aging are going to be talking with us about how they're involved with COVID response here in our state and all the different things they're working on. So that'll be really interesting with Dr. Peter Reed and Dr. Jennifer Carson are going to join us. And then on May 22nd, which is the Friday, we have our Truth About Cannabis for Seniors. And I don't think we'll be back at our venue, so there'll be no samples that day, but we will do the seminar over the webinar, and we have some great speakers lined up for that as well. So that's the second question on the poll. So if you're on a mobile device, you probably have to click next, and then it'll have a question about, would you like to attend any of those seminars? And if you mark yes, then we'll just get you registered and you'll get a confirmation email with the details, how to get onto each of those calls, which will be very similar today. So I'll just leave the poll up for another moment or two because I see people are still responding. And then what we're going to do is open it up to question and answer. So once you've finished the poll, if you do have a question, you can do one of two things. You can find that question and answer button and type in your question, or you can click on the raise hand button, and that'll notify us that you would like to ask your question, and then we'll simply unmute you and you'll be able to ask your question directly to Rich. And the third option is if you're calling in from the phone, on a phone, as I see several people are, pressing *9 will also notify us that you would like to ask Rich a question. So I'm going to just finish the poll. If you weren't able to get to the poll and respond, then simply just give us a call in the office, 775-432-6300, which is actually on the screen, and we'll take care of whatever it is you need help with. So so we have, let me get to the right screen. So we have Joe. I'm going to unmute you, Joe. So Joe, try again, unmuting. Unmute.
It's not working very well.
Oh, there he is.
Can you hear me, Joe?
I'm muted, but yeah, now I am.
Oh, there you go.
There you are, Joe.
Okie dokie. Yeah, I want to thank the three of you for giving this presentation today. I've been following the coronavirus news for weeks, obviously, and I have never heard a more down-to-earth description of what happens to you when you're on a ventilator, because the media had it that the ventilator was a great big lifesaver. So this was just absolutely outstanding, and we've got to get out of our paperwork, as Rich knows. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Do we have any other questions? Looks like you've done an absolute splendid job as always, Rich, and I've answered everybody's questions.
Yeah,
Or
like
having trouble working out how to raise a hand. I see another question's popped up, so let me just unmute you, Larry. So go ahead, Larry.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Larry. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I didn't quite understand the answer whenever I asked or typed it in. If you have a family trust in place for all your financial necessities, and you also have a healthcare power of attorneys, does Mr. Schulze thinks that meets all the requirements, or do you also need a financial power of attorney?
You're going to need a financial power of attorney, and you know, if you look at your life, you know, there's a lot more that you're dealing with than just your assets. You know, one way to view the financial power of attorney is as a bureaucratic document. And I kind of, you know, I tell people it literally covers everything from as simple as, you know, magazine subscriptions to credit cards, to filing tax returns, to dealing with Social Security and health insurance companies. So it's a huge, it's a document that deals with all of that. So, you know, the trust does work well for, you know, like selling a house or an investment that's owned by the trust. But if, you know, most of the stuff that you and I deal with isn't dealing with our house, it's dealing with, you know, the property insurer or health insurance companies or credit cards. So that's what the power of attorney covers. So yes, you still need a power of attorney.
Thank you for that answer. Appreciate that.
Very welcome, Larry.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? You can raise your hand. You can type in a question, or if you're on the phone, just do *9.
So we have another question here, Rich. Someone's typed in, Pat. May we discuss other illegal options besides COVID during our free consultation?
Yes, although as you said, you know, I want to, you know, keep it within the purview of estate planning and powers of attorney. rather than, dealing with, can I sue my neighbor for knocking my fence down kind of questions.
Yeah, so you're after helping people in relation to a will, a trust, power of attorney for financial, power of attorney for healthcare. Something to do with one of those 4 items, pretty much.
Yeah, yes.
So hopefully that answered your question, Pat. And we answered that one. Let's go back up here. And I think actually Pat's raised her hand to perhaps ask a follow-up question. So let me just unmute you, Pat.
She's still muted.
Try again.
Okay.
There we go, Pat. Can you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can, Pat. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. I actually raised my hand because I didn't think you had read my question. But anyway, it was nice to meet you, Rich, because my brother and I actually have coincidentally an appointment with you next Monday. So It was nice to meet you.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you for being on this.
Yes.
Awesome. Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. You're at the head of the queue. I love it. Excellent. Anyone else? Let me just unmute you, Larry.
Okay.
Go ahead, Larry.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, this valuable time here. I have some concern about my daughter and my son-in-law and my grandkids. And my son-in-law is a firefighter paramedic, so he has a lot of exposure. Should the parents of my grandkids become incapacitated, they're over 30, I would like to know what documents are necessary to establish care and so forth of the grandkids. Is that a guardianship or what other documents?
One of those questions that I didn't address, but it's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I'm going to give you 2 answers to that. One answer is they can do a power of attorney or healthcare power of attorney, which is really what you need for a minor, to say that if we can't make decisions for our kids, these people can. That's a good answer for a short-term illness. Or we did that when we the first vacation we took without taking our kids with us. We did a healthcare power of attorney to their grandparents to make decisions for them if we couldn't be reached. So that's a very good, at a minimum, document. If they become permanently disabled, they pass away, or the illness lasts, they don't recover for some reason, then absolutely we need, that's where a guardianship of a minor comes in. And the only way to nominate a guardian for a minor is through a last will and testament in Nevada. And as he's a first responder, we can reach out, but I generally do, those sort of foundational documents for them complimentary, just because they're doing it and I don't have to, thank God. And they are putting their, especially now, they're putting their lives more at risk than probably any of us.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. You're just a wonderful person to be responding and helping us out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Thanks, Larry.
So did anyone else have a question? Rich is charging us a lot to be on this call, so please take advantage of it. It's free to you at the moment.
Thousands and thousands of dollars.
So, yeah. Less for anyone else, but for us, we pay a premium. Okay, well, if we have no more questions, we'd just like to thank everybody for being on here today. Let me just double check that we don't have anyone else with their hand up. Anyone typed in a question? Let me just make sure no one's put anything in chat, because I seem to have lost that window somewhere.
I did notice that quite a few of you are taking advantage of the free consultation, so that's great. So if you do have further questions, you can ask Rich at that time too.
And we do have one that I missed in the chat window because we always forget to look in there. So we have a question. We have a power of attorney and trust and are so very grateful for this information. We will follow up. Yeah, so okay, they already have that in place, but maybe have some questions. So they probably put their hand up to maybe meet with you and ask you some specific questions.
Right. And in light of that, you know, if you do have documents and you have questions about whether or not they address the specific needs of this, or just questions about how they work, that, you know, that review would be included with that consultation. I would just ask, you know, if you could get the documents to me before our meeting so I can look at them.
Yeah, so we had questions, Rich, then about maybe our power of attorney healthcare directive. Does it really do what we want? We could email that to you, set up the consultation, and you'd help us work through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's so helpful to everybody. Okay, so again, thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and we look forward to you being on a future event. Big thank you to you, Rich Schulze, for giving up your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Did you have anything
Yeah.
else you want to say closing out?
No, I just really appreciate Rich's time. So thank you, Rich.
Yeah.
Welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you and all these folks.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.